Board Member Goodhue. Here. Board Member Hall.
Here.
Board Member Pomeroy.
Here.
Chair Croman.
Here. Okay. Do we have any public appearances? Any members of the public wishing to give any matters of concern in front of this board? Okay, hearing none, can we go to announcements, please?
No announcements from staff.
Okay, that was exciting. And then we'll go to orders of business. So we'll go to the, we've got the two items that are on this consent agenda that were brought up last meeting. So can we move forward with the consent agenda?
Okay. You should have received a proposal for saving selected non-historic Carmel homes from demolition or exterior remodeling. And this was written over a year ago by myself. And just let me give you a 2-minute kind of synopsis of how all of this happened. When I moved into my present home 6 years ago, I realized when I bought it, it was on 2 3/4 lots. And it was an old Carmel charmer, I guess you'd call it, built by Denny and Watrous, who were the founders of the Bach Festival. And my concern was that because it sat on so much land that it would be taken down. and it was a 1927 house. So when I bought it, in part, it was to save the house from demolition. And so in the process then, you know, I added an ADU and two-car garage where there had been a lean-to. So anyway, I thought at the time, what's happening to all these houses that are not designated historic? And the reason it wasn't designated historic was that it had been added on to in 1945 and 1979. But the original house remained, the historic part of the house remained. And so I thought, well, maybe we should be talking about what I call a level 2 historic status, which means there aren't as many restrictions as on historic homes, but also it allows or it encourages, it's an incentive program for saving older homes that we deem as old Carmel that don't reach historic status because of changes, minor in some cases, changes to the house itself, but still there's a historic aspect to the house. So I went through historic criteria, and you will see in the proposal, or saw in the proposal that was sent to you, that I go down the restrictive list for historic homes and counter with what would be considered a level 2 historic home. This is not a new concept. As a matter of fact, it was discussed in the 1988 general plan, but not in any detail whatsoever. But it also is a part of many other cities and worldwide where they have more than just historic designation, but levels below strictly historic designation. In part, it would be an incentive program so that people wouldn't regret or rue that they had a historic home, that they would actually be rewarded for saving the house as opposed to being demolished, and that they could see that they could still do a substantial amount to the house, especially inside. We're only talking the exterior of the house here, not the interior. So that's the whole concept, and I don't know if you had a chance to read through the whole thing. There are a lot of questions and issues that would need to be discussed in the future, I think, like how do we screen for these historic or semi-historic homes, level 2 historic homes? Who would be catching them? Would we be identifying them beforehand? How do we get the word out to owners that this is what we want to do, et cetera, et cetera? It would be conceivably only for when a house changes hands at this point, not going back and calling it a level 2 when there's already an owner in there that has been in the house for a long time. So it would, you know, be a planning commission flag basically, and I would be happy to work on identifying houses in Carmel that might qualify for that, and then passing it around to all of us, or having some of us work together on that. And I'm not sure even that would be necessary. It might just be as houses come up before the Planning Commission. But I think we want to be proactive in this so that when people buy houses, just like historic homes, that they know that it is designated, for example, level 2 historic, and that these are the restrictions that are going to be put on the house, much less than historic itself. So with that preamble, I guess we could have a discussion on the concept and where we go from here.
Marnie, the board gave us several courses of action that could be looked at if this is something that we want to do. Can you recap those?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the Carmel Municipal Code outlines the duties and powers of the Historic Resources Board, and the creation of regulations is something that the board would be advisory on. So to amend the zoning code to adopt this type of proposal would require authorization from the City Council. So staff would be looking for direction from the board if you want us to take this proposal to the City Council and see if they would be open to initiating an amendment to the zoning code. Another potential option would be to have staff explore a policy, so something that the city council would adopt, and then you would, in coordination with staff, would implement on a project-by-project basis. So again, that would be something that you would want to give direction to staff if you want us to go before the council to initiate the development of a policy that addresses some of these issues. One of the current efforts that is underway, as you all know, is the Design Traditions Project. And we've made great progress in updating those regulations. We are acknowledging that, preserving the traditional Carmel cottage is something that has been a priority for us. So there will be some discussion of that in the design guidelines. And then also just wanted to mention the City Council will be having a strategic planning meeting at the end of this month. So that would be another forum in which staff could take this proposal to them to see if they want to add it to our work program for the next fiscal year.
Great, thank you. So do we have a discussion on that?
I think there's some wonderful options there. I think taking it to staff and having them put together the concept, and of course then carrying on. And I also think that we do have, thank you, we do have a committee in place who is looking at this kind of thing, so I think they should be involved too.
Merits further discussion.
Okay, so is this a suggestion, or is this something that we should make a motion on formally?
I think a motion is appropriate. We certainly would like to have a majority of the board be in agreement on what direction that you want us to take.
And then should we maybe designate between the policy and the code as an option too? Because that would be a different way on how the staff moves forward, right?
Yeah, and you could certainly indicate which one maybe you have a preference for, if you wanted both options to remain on the table.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion?
Am I allowed to make a motion since I'm the person bringing it?
I would think so.
Okay, I make a motion that we ask staff to address the city council about a policy, and also, what was the other suggestion you had?
Have them work on it.
Pardon?
Have staff
Have staff work on
putting together
putting it all.
It would be initiating a zoning code amendment.
Okay.
So amending our historic preservation chapter or some other form of the municipal code, or just a policy that would be adopted by the city council. It doesn't have the same level of teeth, of enforcement ability, but it's a potential option.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that the zoning code would be the way that we could actually see it adopted. Is that correct?
You could make it mandatory.
But you could set a policy without amending the code. Amending the code is going to take a lot longer and a lot more, it'll codify it, obviously. But I mean, if you have the policy, maybe that's the way we start it. And then if it's received well, then
we could always go to the zoning code later. Is that correct? Once we get all the wrinkles out, then ask for a zoning code change after the policy is accepted?
We could certainly present that approach to the council.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so my amendment.
I have a question. Would it be spot zoning per lot that has the phase 2 or level 2 historic house on it? Or would it be like whole neighborhoods?
I would think per house, yeah. Yeah,
What was the answer to that?
per house. It would look, we
Either
look at
way.
individual homes,
Okay,
not
yeah.
the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, well, that's a
Yeah.
whole different concept. I mean,
Yeah.
That's another way to look at this. I mean, you could look at thinking.
Like a historic district.
Yeah, well, not quite that. I mean, you could, the character of the street, which isn't exactly designated as a district, but it might be a little tricky. But say there's a house there that's going to be taken down, and or is up for taking down. I guess you would have to know exactly what the replacement house was going to look like. Would it fit into the neighborhood or not? Mm-hmm. Which seems very important. I see this happening a lot in Carmel, where you have a very nice neighborhood with a good mix, and then suddenly you have bing houses that are very new and kind of not like Carmel.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to be careful that we don't overstep our bounds, though, because that's a planning commission issue and things like that. So, I mean,
of course, well, going to the code is a pretty big way to go too. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that at this point in time, the neighborhoods aren't so cohesive anymore. It would be hard to say this street, would be, because there are such a variety on each street.
Well, the variety is not bad.
Yeah.
I'm just saying sometimes you get too many that, say you already have a couple of houses there that look like maybe you personally think they don't belong,
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you just don't want that to happen anymore. I don't know.
Well, I'm
we're
thinking
about
baby
something else.
steps
Yeah.
initially, and we can look at it on a house-per-house basis.
Perhaps on a variance?
I'd go into all the possibilities, not all the possibilities, some possibilities. I'm sure planning people have some ideas on how to work this. So, yeah, not that way. I don't know. But I think that there are lots of, like I said, lots of questions that still need to be answered, lots of thoughts about what about this, what about that, and our planning department has not had a chance yet to even respond to this, including the incentives, which would have to be okayed by the city council, I would assume, because it has financial ramifications, not tremendous, but some. Anyway, okay, so the motion now would be to ask staff to bring it as a policy decision for the city council. I think that's where we might start. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, let's do a vote, please.
Could we state it again?
That the staff, planning department staff presumably, would be presenting the level 2 concept to the city council for a policy decision on whether to adopt it or not.
Thank you.
Board Member Goodhue?
Yes.
Board Member Hall?
Yes?
Board Member Pomeroy?
Yes.
Chair Croman?
Yes.
I apologize for the formatting mess at the end of the document that you saw. All I can say is my computer decided to do that. I'm sure it had nothing to do with me.
Okay, and the next issue on the orders of business is the mural, the Nielsen Market mural. So we did get a briefing on that. It seems like there's an independent group seeking funds for that. I guess our decision today would be, do we adopt that as a historic element in the town? Is that really what we're looking for?
So I do have a presentation prepared for you on this item. So if you give me just one moment, I can pull that up, hopefully. There it is. Okay. So the Nielsen Market Map Board. So this is located on San Carlos Street on the north side of the Nielsen Brothers Market. This is a 1979 rendering of the market, and you can see that the map board was sketched in there in the background. So we know at least as of that date, the map board was in place, and in fact, it was there sooner than that. This is what the map board looks like today. So with the construction of the Nielsen Market, the map board was refurbished and got a new look. It was painted by Bill Bates and Carol Minu, I think is how you say it. And this restoration was done in 1981. So this version of the map board is not quite 50 years old, but the map board itself certainly is. So the board asked us to look at the map board to see if it was eligible as a historic resource. And so I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of what that would entail should you direct us to proceed in that direction. So it must represent at least one theme in our historic context statement. It shall retain substantial integrity. It should be at least 50 years of age. And then it must meet one of the following 4 criteria. So either it was associated with an event that made a significant contribution to local or regional history, or it's associated with the lives of persons important to local, state, or national history, or it embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, region, or method of construction. We often use this category for architecture. And then number 4 is that it provides information important to prehistory or history of the local area. So this would be the criteria by which we would evaluate the map board to determine if it is eligible to be placed on the local inventory. And what staff is asking for this afternoon is for some direction from the board if you want us to go ahead and initiate this process. So step 1 of the process is what we call a staff level phase 1 review. We do have this review performed by our city contracted historic consultant. Staff did do them in the past, but we are using the consultant to prepare these. If in that initial review the consultant finds that the map board is ineligible, so it doesn't meet those criteria, then staff would issue a determination of ineligibility. That, of course, is appealable and can be brought up to the board, or we can just bring the determination back to the board for consideration. Step 2 is if the consultant finds that there is some historic resource potential, they would do a phase 1 intensive review. Again, it would be the same city contracted historic consultant. And that intensive review would determine whether or not it meets all the criteria for listing and actual recording. Again, all of these decision points are appealable and can certainly be brought back to the board as well. So staff is just asking this afternoon for you to receive the report and then provide direction on whether we should go ahead and initiate that evaluation. You can direct us to initiate the staff level review, or because we know the map is associated with Bill Bates, who is mentioned in our historic context statement, we could skip that step and just go straight into the phase 1 intensive review. It would save a couple $100 if we did that. And then also, you can provide us with direction on returning to the board with the findings after either review is completed. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Can you go back to the eligibility slide, the 4 items? So the bottom line is we have to decide if it falls under one of those, and Bates is considered a person of historic significance in Carmel.
He is listed in our historic context statement. So one of the things we would need to look at is the version of the mural that was done by Bates is not quite 50 years of age.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether or not that will be a determining factor, but it's certainly something we would look at.
I thought that was pretty important as far as designating something as being historical, the age.
Yeah, the code says should. So in some of these instances, it says
Okay.
shall, and then in others, it says should.
Oh, okay.
So numbers 2 and 4 on that slide would potentially allow it to be considered historic. 'Cause all we need is one of the following 4 criteria. Looks like either one of those might qualify for historic status. Is that correct?
That's something definitely we would look at as part of the review.
Okay.
Possibly number 3 also.
Represents the work of a master, important creative individual, or possesses high artistic value. Yeah. So if the board, similar to the last item, if you want to make a motion and just take a vote on whether to initiate, that would be great.
And you said if we skip the first step with the consideration that this is already, there's already some, some precedent or justification, then we should go to number 2 on that list. Is that correct? We could go right to number 2 and it would save the city some money.
That would be appropriate, and we have done that at a staff level as well.
I'll make that motion that we go directly to level 2 for the review.
I second.
So just to clarify, we're recommending the staff does a level 1 review, right? And we skip that first step. Right?
Yes, so we will skip the staff level phase 1 and go straight into the phase 1 intensive review. And then would you like us to come back to you with the findings of the review?
Yes.
Okay.
And how long does that normally take?
It'll depend on workloads, but maybe 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, great. So we have a motion. Did we get a second?
I
You
seconded.
seconded it. Can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Goodhue?
Yes?
Board Member Hall?
Yes?
Board Member Pomeroy?
Yes.
Chair Croman?
Yes. Okay, can we move to the public hearings, please?
You are, okay. Okay, if you give us just 1 second, the video quality on Zoom has not been cooperating as we've been coming back into the chambers to present, so Evan is gonna present from his office.
Marnie, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Give me just a second to get my presentation going. Sebastian, can you please enable screen sharing? Okay, and Marnie, is that showing in full screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, so the subject property is known as the Northern California Savings and Loan Complex. Sorry, I just need to adjust something on my screen. The site has also been known as the 7th and Dolores, as well as the Palo Alto Savings and Loan Complex, but they all refer to the same development. The complex was constructed in 1972 and designed by architects Walter Bertie and William Shaw, and is of the Bay Region modern style. Both the architects as well as the architectural style of the building are recognized as significant in the city's historic context statement. The complex is located at the southeast corner of 7th Avenue and Dolores Street and is located in the Service Commercial Zoning District. The complex is comprised of lots 2, 4, 6, and 8, with the ownership of the complex split between two different ownership groups. Lots 2 and 4 are comprised of the bank building, and lots 6 and 8 contain a very small portion of the southern corner of the bank building, as well as the entirety of the community room and the southern portion of the parking lot. Lots 6, 8, and 10 are the proposed site of an associated project that will be described later. However, lot 10 is not part of the complex site and is shown here for reference only. In 2019, the HRB made a decision to list the complex on the local inventory of historic resources. That determination was appealed to the City Council, who granted the appeal and made a decision to issue a determination of ineligibility in February 2020, with the primary finding that the complex had not reached the age threshold of significance, 50 years old. That determination of ineligibility expired on October 26, 2022, when the building became 50 years old. And as such, the complex is required to be reevaluated for its eligibility for the local inventory. While the complex was found to be ineligible for the local inventory, the complex had previously been found to be eligible for listing on the California Register of Historic Resources. This past determination was made by architectural historians Richard Janik in 2001, Margaret Clovis in 2019, and most recently past consultants as part of the evaluation of this application. The California Environmental Quality Act requires that sites eligible for the California Register be treated as historic resources. The California Environmental Quality Act defines a project as the whole of an action which has the potential for resulting in either a direct physical change in the environment or a reasonably foreseeable indirect physical change in the environment. Therefore, even if the lead agency, the city in this case, needs to grant more than one approval for a project, only one CEQA document should be prepared. The project being considered consists of multiple development applications. One application includes the construction of a new mixed-use building across lots 6, 8, and 10. The other application is for the proposed relocation of the community room from lot 6 to lot 4. That would be required to accommodate the construction of the mixed-use project. So while there are multiple applications to be considered, for the purposes of CEQA, this is one project. On January 8th, 2021, an application was submitted for a new mixed-use building that included the demolition of the community room. As part of the application, a Phase 2 evaluation was prepared that found the demolition to be consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards. On April 19th, 2021, the HRB considered the Phase 2 report, however did not agree with the conclusions of that evaluation and provided staff with appropriate findings to prepare a finding of noncompliance. At the next hearing, the board adopted that finding of noncompliance, finding that the demolition of the community room would not be consistent with the Secretary's standards. That finding of noncompliance was then appealed to the City Council, and the City Council heard that appeal on August 3rd of 2021. The Council denied that appeal and upheld the HRB's decision to adopt a finding of noncompliance and adopted the same findings as the HRB as part of their decision. About a year later, on May 24th, 2022, a new application was submitted for a new mixed-use building, which included the relocation of the community room as opposed to the demolition. On August 15th, 2022, the HRB heard a preliminary review of the proposed project to give feedback regarding the proposed relocation. And then on October 3rd of last year, a second application was submitted showing the proposed relocation of the community room from Lot 6 to Lot 4 that is associated with the larger mixed-use project, which brings us to today. So effectively, the HRB is being asked to make two decisions. The first, should the complex be listed on the Carmel Inventory and Carmel Register of Historic Resources? And two, is moving the community room consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation? All right, so part one, evaluation for listing on the Carmel Inventory and Register. So the municipal code requires that no application for property development be deemed complete unless it includes a determination that the property is either eligible or ineligible for the Carmel inventory. If the property appears to meet the criteria for the inventory, the planning department shall order an intensive survey for the property to be prepared by a qualified professional under contract to the city. The department contracted with past consultants to prepare the intensive survey, which is also known as a Phase 1 evaluation. The ultimate conclusion of the Phase 1 report was that the complex meets the criteria for listing on the local inventory. The municipal code also outlines the process for determining the eligibility for the Carmel inventory, and there are 4 criteria used. We just went over this with the last item, so I'm not going to go through all 4, but they should be fresh in your mind. Specific to this project, though, the Phase 1 evaluation concluded that the complex meets the first criteria for listing, should be representative of at least one theme included in the context statement. So the development of Carmel-by-the-Sea can be organized into 5 broad themes: prehistory and Hispanic settlement, economic development, government, civic and social institutions, architectural development, and the development of arts and culture. The complex supports the theme of architectural development as a commercial property type constructed in a significant architectural style noted in the Carmel Historic Context Statement. The Phase 1 evaluation also concluded that the complex meets the second criteria for listing, shall retain substantial integrity. According to National Register Bulletin 15, How to Apply the National Criteria for Evaluation, integrity is defined as the ability of a property to convey its significance. There are 7 aspects of integrity: location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. To retain historic integrity, a property must retain several, if not most of the aspects. The Phase 1 evaluation states, with the exception of entrance door modifications and selective window glazing replacements, the exterior of the bank complex is essentially intact with no square footage additions to the original footprints of both the bank building and the community room. The bank complex maintains all 7 aspects of historic integrity. Phase 1 evaluation also found the complex meets the 3rd criteria for listing, should be a minimum of 50 years of age. The complex is 50 years old. Lastly, the Phase 1 evaluation found that the complex meets the 4th criteria for listing, shall meet at least one of the following 4 criteria for listing as a primary or local resource. So the complex meets criteria number 3, embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, region, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master, an important creative individual, or possesses high artistic values. To qualify under criteria 3, the resource should also meet at least one of the 4 additional criteria that are listed on the right. The Phase 1 evaluation found that the complex meets criteria 1, has been designed and or constructed by an architect, designer, builder, or contractor whose work has contributed to the unique sense of time and place recognized as significant in the historic context statement, in this case Walter Bertie and William Shaw, as well as criteria 3, be a good example of an architectural style or construction recognized as significant in the context statement, in this case Bay Region Modern. In addition to meeting the eligibility criteria for the Carmel inventory, as previously noted, the complex has also been determined to be eligible for the California Register of Historic Resources under California Register Criteria 3, embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, region, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master or possesses high artistic values. The Phase 1 concludes that the complex is eligible for the California Register under Criterion 3 in the area of architecture for its intact Bay Region modern stylistic elements designed by prominent local architects Walter Birdie and Will Shaw. The building complex, consisting of a bank building and detached community room connected by an elevated walkway, maintains all of its character-defining features and possesses all 7 aspects of historic integrity. The complex has also been found to be eligible for the California Register under Criteria 3 by architectural historian Richard Janik in 2001 and Margaret Clovis in 2019. As defined in the Municipal Code, a resource found to be eligible for listing on the California Register is a primary resource. The Municipal Code also identifies that primary resources are listed on the local inventory and register, which is why the resolution before the board states inclusion on the register as well as the inventory. All right, so part 2, and I'm just going to take a brief break if you don't mind. All right, so should the HRB determine that the complex is ineligible for listing, the board would be required to adopt specific findings identifying why the site is ineligible for listing. The findings should also identify the specific basis for the determination to be included in the determination of ineligibility. All right, so that concludes part 1, and moving into part 2. Determination of project consistency with the Secretary's standards. So as a reminder, the project was determined to be eligible for the California Register. So even if the board does adopt findings for ineligibility on the local inventory, this section would still be applicable as the site has been determined to be a historic resource for the purposes of CEQA. So the scope of work proposed as part of the subject project includes the relocation of the Northern California Savings and Loan Complex Community Room from Lot 6 to Lot 4 of the complex site. While there is a larger mixed-use building that is proposed as part of the larger project, only the relocation of the community room is being considered at this time. The relocation of the community room constitutes a major alteration to a historic resource as defined in the Municipal Code. The Municipal Code requires determinations of consistency with the Secretary's standards for all major and minor alterations to historic resources, and that consistency determinations for major alterations shall require an evaluation by a qualified professional, and review and approval by the Historic Resources Board. Past consultants evaluated the project for consistency with the Secretary's standards and found that standards 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10 are applicable to the proposed project. The evaluation concluded that the project is not consistent with standards 2, 5, 9, and 10, and overall the project is not consistent with the Secretary's standards. The Phase 2 evaluation found the proposed relocation to be in conflict with Standard 2, which states the historic character of a property will be retained and preserved, the removal of distinctive materials or alterations of features, spaces, and spatial relationships that characterize the property will be avoided. The evaluation also found that the relocation to be in conflict with Standard 5, which states distinctive materials, features, finishes, and construction techniques or examples of craftsmanship that characterize the property will be preserved. Also in conflict were standards 9 and 10. Standard 9 states new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy historic materials, features, and spatial relationships that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and will be compatible with the new historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportions and massing to protect the integrity of the property and its environment. And Standard 10 states new additions and adjacent or related new construction will be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. The The Phase 2 evaluation identified for each standard how the project failed to meet the specific standard. In summary, the report states that the original spatial relationship between the bank building and community room is a primary character-defining feature for the site, and these spatial relationships would not be retained as a result of the proposed action. The bank building and the community room were designed as an integrated unit, and that the relocation removes this vital and original spatial relationship. The community room's massing and placement allows the two building masses to appear as they were composed as a single building, and that relocating the community room from its original location would substantially alter the south elevation. The proposed community room's relocation removes another important character-defining feature, the elevated walkway connecting the bank building to the community room. The relocation of the community room will likely not be reversible, as the intent of the relocation is to develop the lots immediately to the south. And lastly, relocating the community room will destroy the integrity of the setting of the historic resource. In addition to the conclusions reached in the Phase 2 evaluation, the HRB and City Council previously adopted a resolution issuing a finding of noncompliance for the demolition of the community room, in which substantially similar findings were made when considering the demolition of the community room, including specific findings, including findings specific to the importance of the existing spatial relationships between the bank building and the community room complex. The municipal code states that if an evaluation concludes that a proposed alteration is not consistent with the Secretary's standards, the report shall list aspects of the project that are not consistent, along with guidance for modifying the project to comply with the Secretary's standards. The Phase 2 evaluation concluded that the project under consideration proposes the relocation of a primary character-defining feature of the building's complex, the spatial relationship between the bank building and the community room. To maintain the integrity of the subject historic site and its environment, this report respectfully recommends a new design approach that allows the original Birdie Shaw design and the building's complex corresponding character-defining features to remain in place. If the HRB disagrees with the conclusions of this evaluation, the board should direct staff to obtain a second opinion and have a second Phase 2 evaluation prepared. Once prepared, staff would then return to the HRB for review of the second Phase 2 evaluation. So with that, staff recommends that the HRB adopt a resolution adding a property known as the Northern California Savings and Loan Complex located at the southeast corner of Dolores Street and 7th Avenue to the Carmel Inventory of Historic Resources and the Carmel Register of Historic Resources. And 2, adopt a separate resolution issuing a finding of noncompliance with the Secretary of Interior standards for the relocation of the Northern California Savings and Loan Complex. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions, and thank you for sitting with me through that.
Evan, that was a great rundown. There's a lot of moving pieces, so that was very comprehensive. We really appreciate it. Does the board have any questions initially for Evan before we open to public?
I just wanted to clarify that we're talking about the complex now, and when we last looked at this quite a few months ago, we were considering the annex and whether the annex was historic, separate from the main bank building. And now we're talking about the complex itself as a whole unit. So can you kind of clarify how that jump occurred, Evan, where we're now considering the whole thing as opposed to each as a separate unit? Because Meg Clovid, as I recall, last time said that the annex she did not consider historic or to meet the standards of historic, whereas the main large building did.
Sure. So Meg's report in 2019 was a standalone evaluation of just the community room to see if that building on its own rose, if you evaluate that building on its own, if that could qualify for inclusion on the California Register, which her evaluation did not. That was an addendum to a prior evaluation which looked at the entire complex site. The reason we're evaluating the entire site today is because when we're describing the whole project, which is the two different applications, there's some language in the code that says no, let me go back to my slide, I don't want to misquote it. No application for property development shall be deemed complete unless it includes a determination that the property is either eligible or ineligible for the Carmel inventory. So the previous determination that the City Council issued in February 2020 expired in October of last year. So because we have an application now, and the previous determination expired when the building reached 50 years old, and we have two applications that are currently submitted for improvements across the entire complex site, we need to make a determination as to whether the full complex site is eligible for the inventory now.
What are the implications for Carmel designation versus other designation, and if there's conflict between the two designations?
So in terms of review process, it's exactly the same. Being listed on the register, there are actually some benefits that become available to the property owners. For example, if you're listed on the register, the Mills Act becomes available, which is property tax relief for preserving a historic building. There are also certain waivers that become available. There's some additional ones off the top of my head I can't recall, but there are certain benefits that become available being on the register. But in terms of the review process, it's exactly the same. Each application that would be submitted would still be reviewed by the HRB and subject to the same review standards.
Thank you.
When we voted on this last time, it was purely on the demolition of the annex, right? And at that vote, we had two people that voted in favor, one against, and one abstained, which we thought was a not counting vote. But then we were later told that abstain vote actually turned into a yes vote. So I just want to get clarification what would have happened had that yes vote, or had that abstain vote not been a yes vote. Would have still, since we had two yeses and one no at that point, would have still moved forward?
I believe it would have. I think it's worth noting that what's before you now is a different project.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay. But you think that still would have been moved forward because there were two yeses, an abstention, and a no?
Actually, I can't say that with certainty.
Okay. I mean, I think that's important to note as part of the historical evolution of this whole project. Okay.
What happens if there is a 2-2 vote?
Then the motion would fail.
Okay. That might be something we need to come back to.
That's critical then, because then that would mean that it had not been voted as historic by the HRB.
Sorry, was that a question?
No.
Okay, okay.
Okay. Any other comments before we open it up to the public? Okay, let's open it to the public, please.
Good evening, board members. This gives me no pleasure to say this, but I believe in the interest of good governance and protection of the process that it needs to be said. Only earlier today I
Can
found.
you just state your name?
Oh, I
before-
apologize.
For the people that are out there.
That's fine, yes. My name is Ian Martin. I am a Carmel-by-the-Sea resident and I'm a former planning commissioner. Earlier today, I found out that 7th and Dolores was before your body again today, and I sent an email with essentially the contents of what I'm about to say now. So, for the integrity of the proceedings, and so that other city bodies like the Planning Commission or City Council can depend on the HRB's findings, I'm urging Board Member Hall to recuse herself from these two particular items before you. Board Member Hall has been publicly outspoken about her belief that buildings that are modern or contemporary in nature are not appropriate for Carmel-by-the-Sea, that modernism in general is a threat to Carmel's charm and essential character. So 7th and Dolores is perhaps the largest, most prominent example of contemporary architecture in our village, the most pronounced manifestation of modernism in our town. Therefore, I don't believe, respectfully, Board Member Hall can give this building or any other building that is modern or contemporary in nature her impartial and objective consideration as a member of the Historic Resources Board. I hope that Board Member Hall will trust the judgment of her colleagues on the HRB to make the right decision without her involvement and recuse herself for these two items. Her recusal would not only be appropriate, it would also come with good precedent. Several years ago, Don Goodhue, when he was a member of the Planning Commission, had to recuse himself from a Planning Commission consideration of this very building. Acting as a private citizen, he had publicly decried changes the property owner had made to the building. When the proposed change to the building came before the Planning Commission later, he was made to recuse himself even though his public comments did not directly relate to the proposed changes. His recusal was found to be necessary to preserve the integrity of the Planning Commission's decision as a whole. He willingly recused, as I hope Board Member Hall will now do. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm David O'Neill. Thank you for doing what you do. We really appreciate it. I just wanted to say that I think that everybody has their own personal opinions, and I think that as professionals and as conscientious citizens, I think we would all, set aside our personal beliefs to apply the regulations and the ideas and the best interests of the community. So I don't think that it would be necessary for Board Member Hall to recuse herself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Public comment?
Please.
Kent Seavey, Pacific Grove, California.
Go up.
That particular building, if you look at it in context with our most significant block of commercial buildings in Carmel-by-the-Sea, is a bookend, 21st century bookend, to the late 19th, early 20th century City Hall of wood construction on the northwest corner of Ocean. Between them, you can give the history of commercial architecture in Carmel and some idea of its direction. The business of modern architecture has been discussed here since the first modern building was built in 1919 by Charles Sumner Green, his own home. Shed roof, U-shaped, and very, very modern by our standards, but then considered a vernacular. It was the first building to be a tilt-up. It was the first building to have a concrete floor. So its method of construction was equitable with the quality of the architect who did it. This particular building went to extreme ends to connect it to the community by the work that was done in the concrete leading to the roadway. It was an incredible design by two fine architects who are extremely well known in our community. So I would strongly recommend that you keep that building intact and in place rather than placating a European client.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Richard Barrett, way former planning commissioner and architect. I think referring to the community room as an annex is misleading. The community room is part of the bank building, and it's part of the overall concept of the design to have it where it is. It's sort of defeats the purpose if it's just picked up and moved in back of the higher structure. There's some discussion about whether the community room was an afterthought or built after the center part of the bank building was built, and this is not true. I know that because I was here and watched the building go up, and I also have just a print of the construction drawings showing the community room on the plan. And this was not a later application. And then this is a rendering of the bank, including the community room, and you can see that the roof lines and the lower roof lines and slopes are integral to the design. And if you chop the community room off, it's a different animal when that happens. So anyway, I think the 7th and Dolores building is one of the handful of good pieces of architecture built in Carmel in the last half of the 20th century. There are many good buildings in the first half of the 20th century, but there are only a handful in the last half. So I hope you will preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hood?
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Hood. I'm a local architect, member of the AIA board. The comments I'll make very briefly reflect the sentiment of the majority of the AIA board. I want to compliment past architects for the completeness of their report and for Evans walking through that with us. As has already been stated, this building was conceived as one structure. I find it odd to be referring to it as a complex that suggests it may have been an afterthought or grown over time. The building was conceived as one single structure where a community room was a pledge made by the chairman of Northern California Bank to serve as part of the community. The banking was one function, the community room for gathering was another function that was integral to the original design. With the completed project, if you just look at the building from the south and not from the intersection, it is immediately evident that it is an integral part of the shed roof composition of the entire structure, connected structurally between the two buildings. If this building was proposed today with the bank building, it would be considered one structure because of the structural connection, which the city enforces on other projects. So it is actually not detached, as Evan stated. It is actually structurally attached to the main structure. Removal of this building and repositioning on the outside around the corner is akin to tearing off an arm and reconnecting it at the hip. That has absolutely nothing to do with the architect's intent or use of the building as a separate structure. And I would strongly urge the HRB to consider the merit of the original design, the architects that designed it, and go with past recommendation that it be considered a historic resource and to not move the structure. These comments are reflected by the rest of the AIA board. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this matter? Okay, let's close the public portion and go back to the board. Comments or thoughts from the board?
I'm sorry, sir. My name is Lucinda Lloyd, and I did have my little reaction hand up there, but
sorry.
That's all
I
right.
didn't see you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Cindy Lloyd. I was born and raised in Carmel. Incidentally, I also worked for Walter Berti as a secretary at one point in my life. However, I would just like to echo what Mr. Barrett and Mr. Hood said about this structure. The community room is an integral part of the whole building. And when walking north on Dolores, you will see that the concrete work done by Brad Bowman, which is a work of art, using pebbles that kind of mimic the shoreline on the beach, is an introduction into the building. It's not just an add-on, and taking that part of the building away from the main building would reduce the integrity of the whole building. So I can't say it any more eloquently than Mr. Hood has just finished saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we can't see everyone that's out there, so is there anyone else in the public that wishes to speak? Please just go ahead. Okay, hearing nobody, then we'll go back to the board. Any thoughts or comments from the board? Kathy?
Well, I was all ready to move the building until the architects started making a case for not moving the building. If I'm not an architect, it doesn't.
Can you sit a little bit closer to your mic? Thank you.
I was getting the sun out of my eye. I was ready to move the building until the architects said, no, it's the other one back there. Thank you. Started talking about the design and the intention, and that it was the community room building was there originally. To me, as not an architect, it doesn't seem like it's part of the same building, just to me as a layperson. And it looks different, and I see that there's a walkway there, but it's not like being a wall. It's not like being attached by a wall in my eyes. And moving the building preserves the building. You could still use the building's still there. And I think the project being proposed that is why we're talking about all this would be an asset to Carmel. What I've seen, it's beautiful Spanish looking building, and that would bring a lot of good to the neighborhood there. So making myself unpopular with the architects, I think it's okay to move the building.
I can't agree with that. If you look at the roof lines, as was pointed out, you can see from the south there's a transitional something going on there. I think that this is the way it was designed, and it's a massive building. It needs space. And I realize we're not talking about the proposed development, which would come right up next to the larger building, but it would crowd it incredibly. It even needs the parking lot as open space around there. And it is a beautiful bookend, as was said, to what's happening in town. And it's also a piece of history. If you look at banking, and we all know what's happening to banking now, Wells Fargo has one teller in there. I don't know how long that structure is going to last. And I quail to think of what people are going to think is a viable alternative to put in that building when the time comes. So I think that I understand that it's been very hard to make this a commercial go. But as far as Carmel, the city, its history, this is a bookend, or not a bookend. It goes from the China Art Center, and I can't remember what the name of that bank was, to Siegel's Bank of Carmel up on the corner on Ocean Avenue. to this building. It's a progression, and that's the kind of thing that is mentioned in the context statement. And also as someone on this board who has been put here to enforce the municipal code and what the code says about historic preservation, I think this building has to be saved, has to be kept. And I think you might as well tear it down if you're going to remove that building and build a building right up smack against it. The walls, too, as were pointed out by Cindy Lloyd, were done by a recognized artist. Nobody's ever talked about them, but if you've looked at the beauty of those walls, the concrete walls with the pebbles in them, those are pieces of art in themselves. That's all.
I'm hesitant to say anything. I'm not for moving the building, what has been referred to as the annex, the community room. I mean, if indeed, whether it's historic or not historic, or demolished or not demolished, I think that it would ruin any concept of that community room to move it.
I think the staff has done a great job in laying this out, and as they list out the requirements laid out and how they match to, how aspects of that building match to the requirements, I think it would be very hard to counter that and to come up with a credible discussion and a credible way forward to say that we feel that this is not in line with those tenets. And so I think sometimes we have to put aside our personal views and what we think and what we don't think and look at the data. And I mean, this is a clear case where I think the data, I'm not convinced that it did before, but certainly, and Evan, again, I commend you and the rest of the team. I think the way it's laid out for us today, the data and the correlation really, really, are lined up well. And I think that, I think that it's clearly a historic structure, and certainly it's very credible. The way they've laid it out is very credible that we keep everything together. So at this point, I would also kind of side with the majority, but I think we need to take a vote unless there's further discussion. So we need I guess we need to make a two-part motion on this. The first part is, and I think maybe we do it backwards if we can. The first part would be move or don't move the annex, and then the second part would be make it add it to the historic registry.
So,
can we
Chair,
do that?
can I clarify one of the motions?
Yes, sir.
So for the relocation, it's either adopt the finding of noncompliance as recommended by staff, and then the alternative would be obtain the second opinion.
Okay.
The determination of consistency, the code only gives the authority to a qualified professional to make that determination. So if you do find that you are not in agreement with that report, you could direct staff to obtain a second opinion, and we can get that second opinion and bring it back to you. But staff nor the board for major alterations can say that a major alteration is consistent with the standards. That needs to come from a qualified professional.
So if we agree that it's consistent, we don't have to address the second aspect?
If you, I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
So if we agree that the standards are met and it should be added to the register, then we don't have to address the relocation?
Let me pull my recommendation up on the screen. Just give me 1 second. So for this one, this is whether to list the property on the inventory and register locally. This second item is issuing a finding of noncompliance, and that's what I heard more of the discussion on. So the finding of noncompliance would be that the If you adopt it as written by staff, that would be that the relocation is not consistent with the Secretary of Interior's standards, meaning that you do not approve of the relocation, in simple terms. If you do not agree and think that the relocation is appropriate, then you should direct staff to obtain a second opinion, and we would seek a second phase 2 report.
Okay. So would anyone like to make a motion?
Well, I would move that we place this building, 7th and Dolores, on the register and on the other list, which escapes me at the time, and so be it. Two separate measures. I think the other is separate from this, right?
Okay, yep. Is there a second? Can I second it? I'll second it. Can we call the vote?
Board Member Goodhue?
Yes?
Board Member Hall?
I'm going to recuse myself just out of total caution. I don't think it'll change the end result of the vote.
Board Member Pomeroy?
I will go with the majority and say yes.
And Chair Croman?
Yes. Okay, and then we'll need a second motion for the second portion.
I move that we consider the moving of the so-called annex building as non-compliant with our Secretary of Interior's standards. And I vote to, and I move to deny it.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
Board Member Goodhue?
Yes?
Board Member Hall?
Yes.
Board Member Pomeroy?
Yes.
Chair Croman?
Yes. Okay, great.
And then just for clarification, the recusal will be recorded as a yes vote in accordance with the rules of procedure.
Okay.
Okay. Won't change anything.
That's what happened before, too.
Mhm. Okay, can we go to the next item?
Chair, would you like to intro it?
Oh, sorry, can we go to the HE 22294, the guardhouse proposal?
Thank you. Can you see my screen all right?
Yep, I got you.
Great. My name is Catherine Wallace, and I'll be speaking about historic evaluation 22294 Schneider, the consideration of adding an individual property located at the southwest corner of Mission and 12th in the single-family residential zoning district to the inventory of historic resources. All right, so earlier this fall, staff retained the services of Margaret Clovis to complete a phase 1 initial review. Clovis concluded that because the subject property had a shingle siding, a U-shaped plan, and enough other craftsman details, it warranted an intensive evaluation. So Ms. Clovis then prepared the DPR 523 form, and that review concluded that the subject property was eligible for listing in the California Register and Carmel inventory as a locally significant resource because it represents Carmel's architectural chronology, specifically the craftsman architectural style as described in the context statement. Our applicant disagrees with the conclusion that the building is architecturally significant. So staff is asking the Historic Resources Board to review the intensive survey, as well as the applicant-sponsored second opinion authored by architectural historian Dr. Anthony Kirk, and a peer review by Kent Seavey, and to determine whether or not to add this property to the Carmel inventory. So the guardhouse is a craftsman cottage built in 1925. The architect and builder is unknown, and no original plans are available. The original owners were Henry and Martha Guard. Henry worked in Carmel for a short time for the Carmel Street Department, and then worked as a well driller in Sonoma. The property was deemed ineligible for the inventory in 2008, and that determination expired in 2013. As I mentioned, in fall of 2022, Ms. Clovis found it significant for its architecture and found the property to retain integrity. So I'm going to start with the 2008 determination. This was done by Catherine Gualtieri and Susan Lehman, and it is a brief evaluation, just one page, and it made two main points. The first point being that sliding wood windows were not characteristic of the 1920s period, and they note that no permits for the work were in the file, but they presume that the windows were replaced. They also state that it's a vernacular cottage, not associated with important people or events, and nor does it embody the distinctive architectural characteristics of any type, period, region, or method of construction, nor the work of a master. We're going to come back to the question of the windows later in the presentation, but they are single pane wood windows with brass hardware. We have tripartite style, like 3 light sliding windows. We have 2 light sliding windows, and we have 3 casement windows. So Ms. Clovis's intensive evaluation, as I mentioned, finds the property significant under architecture as a good example of the craftsman style, and it lists the following character-defining features. Single story, U-shaped plan with an interior courtyard, wood shingle siding, fenestration, including the windows, doors, and it has extended window sills, a brick chimney, a gabled roof system, and a 1-car detached garage with double doors and board and batten siding. There have been alterations to this property. In 2009, it was re-roofed. It has a comp shingle roof, and the garage had a poured concrete slab for the foundation. The DPR form mentions likely replacement windows, and then we have shutters, window boxes, copper gutters, and downspouts, and exterior light fixtures that are all believed to have been installed between 2008 and 2011. We have a picket fence, and then a brick walkway in the courtyard. There's also a rear deck and rear stairs that are not original. We've been through these with our previous couple items tonight, but criterion 3 is the one relevant for this property. We've also been over the 7 aspects of integrity, and we'll come back to these, but the DPR form found that overall integrity was retained, specifically because it's still in its original location. It still has its U-shaped plan, its original roof configuration. It's still located in its residential setting. When it comes to materials, it retains the majority of its historic materials, including the wood shingle siding, the exposed rafters, wood windows, which again we'll debate if they're original or not, window sills, Dutch doors, the clinker brick chimney. If the windows were replaced, they appear to have been replaced in a manner consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. In terms of workmanship, we have the shingle cladding, the rafters, the chimney, all original, and some non-original workmanship, such as the shutters and window boxes. The guardhouse does retain its physical features that convey its character. You can tell that it's an early country style cottage. So our consultant and staff referred to the historic context statement when making the decision that it's a good example of a craftsman style. So this is what the context statement says, with check marks next to all the features that this house reflects. And we're going to just go through them one by one. Horizontality of proportions. Low-pitched overhanging gable roof forms with exposed rafters in the east, and undisguised exposed structural elements such as the rafters and beams. It doesn't have exterior beams, it has interior beams, and it does not have any braces. It has shingle siding and wooden brick, and it does not have any stone. It has a U-shaped plan. You can see from the aerial here as well, the rear decks that are not original, but it has a clear U-shaped plan. It also has a porch, and the courtyard can be considered an outdoor space, and it has clustered windows in horizontal bands. The context statement also cites tripartite windows, which we have, and windows with extended sills. And we have sliding windows, and we have 3 hinged casement windows. The context statement also gives this description of residential architecture, and I've just put check marks next to the terms that fit with this property. Simple, has shingles, has Dutch doors, it has a detached single garage, front gable with board and batten siding. So I'm moving on to our second opinion by Dr. Anthony Kirk, provided to the city earlier this month, and we're just going to go through each of his 12 points one by one. So Dr. Kirk questions the 1925 construction date and says he believes it was constructed in the late 1920s. There's an image up of the building permit, and you can see August 1925 is when the guards received their building permit. So the book, A Field Guide to American Houses, dates the craftsman style between 1905 and 1930, so this home would be squarely within that range. And the context statement says the heyday of craftsman building in Carmel lasted from 1905 into the early 1920s. So it's a bit on the later end locally. Dr. Kirk noted that the deck at the southeast corner of the home, that's the middle picture there, was expanded before 1959 rather than post 1962 as the DPR form claims. So to make that revision with no change in findings. There's a typo that can be updated on the bottom of page 2. Number 4, he says that boxed eaves in gabled ends is incorrect terminology, which we could update to gable end fascia board instead. He also speaks to the residential building record, this image on the right-hand side of your screen, which shows no deck west of the chimney, which would appear to prove that this single pedestrian exit door on the rear elevation with the short landing and steps is not original. There's also a basement door that is not cited in the DPR form, which would not affect the findings. And moving on to a discussion of the front doors here, Dr. Kirk consulted with Mr. Rob Nicely, president of Carmel Building and Design, who offered that none of the house doors are original because they are Douglas fir rather than redwood and are fitted with modern hardware. And there's no way to know if the extant doors are original or not. Similar to Ms. Clovis's finding that the windows, despite the replacement of the windows, the home still has integrity, and that argument would apply to the doors as well. The style of the doors fits with the period of the home, and if they are replacements, they are compliant with the Secretary standards. Let's see, Mr. Nicely thought that some of the windows, or all the windows, were original. Dr. Kirk asserts they are not. And again, we simply don't know if the windows are original or not. We are looking at the residential building record here, and there's a little blow up on the right of the section on windows. DH would stand for double hung, You see casement there, has a little X next to it, then steel sash and screens. We're not sure if sliding was not specified here because there's just not a line item for sliding, or potentially if the windows were always casement and never sliding. So this is just a clue that we're evaluating. Moving on to some of Dr. Kirk's other points. He asserts that the shutters and the flower boxes really give the residents a different feeling than it originally had. Staff feels that these are easily removable, compatible features. They're cosmetic and period appropriate. Dr. Kirk asserts that overall, this is a poor example of the craftsman style because it lacks beams and braces, and that we don't know what it looked like originally, and that there are simply better examples of craftsman homes in Carmel. Staff has considered all of this, and per the ordinance, the resource does not need to be the first, last, only, or best, or even exceptional example. To be considered eligible for the inventory, it simply needs to be a good example. So that's what we'll be deciding tonight. He also states that the detached garage has since been converted to a bedroom, but the interior use of the garage today doesn't impact the findings of significance and integrity. Dr. Kirk also discusses the garage fenestration, which has been altered. There's discussion, Mr. Nicely believed the garage doors to be original, but not the rear pedestrian door on the garage. And he also believes 3 of the 5 windows are not original. Staff agrees that the fenestration has been altered on the garage, but overall supports Ms. Clovis in her finding that the garage retains sufficient integrity. So now we have a peer review of Dr. Kirk's report produced by Kent CV. He also makes a few points, and we're going to go through these one by one. So Mr. CV believes all the windows were changed out sometime prior to 1960. As I mentioned, staff feels that even if the windows were changed out, they were replaced in a manner consistent with the Secretary's standards. They were replaced so many decades ago that they could be considered an essential component of the design today, because changes to a property that have acquired significance in their own right should be retained and preserved. And most critical when thinking about fenestration changes would be the size of the original opening. And we don't have original plans, but the size, the placement, the location, and the size of the openings has not been debated by anyone involved on this project so far. And the configuration and operability just can't be definitively determined. What we do know is that the context statement cites sliding windows and double doors as period appropriate features. Mr. CV also talks about how craftsman fenestration typically includes fixed sash windows with decorative patterns of muntins in the upper sash. This is quoted directly from the context statement when it's talking about early 20th century cottages generally, and of any of these styles, Queen Anne, Colonial Revival, or Craftsman. But the paragraph that's talking explicitly and specifically about Craftsman really only references sliding, hinged casement, or double hung windows. So while it's true, decorative muntins are a common Craftsman feature, not all Craftsman homes have to have decorative muntins. Let's see, CV agrees the garage has been altered. Yes, it has. We feel that overall it still retains integrity, and regardless, the house is the primary resource on the property. CV agrees that because the home doesn't have braces or beams, those are really necessary character defining elements. Staff feels that they are listed as possible features, but not necessary. And other inventory listed Craftsman homes don't feature both braces and beams. Let's CV asserts that there are better local examples of the craftsman style, homes with handsome front porches, for example. And per the ordinance, we aren't deciding if this is the best or an exceptional example, simply if it's a good example. And then Mr. CV concludes by saying that the property lacks the necessary physical integrity to meet the criteria for historic listing, and staff supports Ms. Clovis's finding that overall integrity has been retained. So in conclusion, staff's recommendation is that the Historic Resources Board adopt a resolution adding the individual property located southwest of 12th and Mission to the Carmel inventory of historic resources. Alternatively, should the HRB determine the property is ineligible, please adopt specific findings identifying why it is ineligible for listing. And you should identify the specific basis for the determination so we can cite it in the determination of ineligibility.
Thanks,
That
Catherine.
concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions by the board?
Just excellent presentation.
Very thorough.
Yes.
Okay. Can we open it to public comment, please? Any members of the public wish to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to comment if I could. My name is Walt. I own a home in Carmel, and I'm aware of this home. This is a very tiny, tiny college. I can't speak to the various architectural issues, but clearly there've been some changes made to this house, and it's on a fairly large lot. So personally, I think the owner at this time should be able to make some changes if they really wish to. Obviously, the planning department have some input as to what can actually be done, but I don't see why the owner should be restricted significantly, particularly since any kind of work would help upgrade the house and make it so that it could actually house more people. It's a small, small house from what I can tell. So hopefully he'd be able to use it for an enlarged home in the future if need be.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Schneider? Can you unmute,
You're on mute.
please?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, thank you. This is my home. I'm the applicant, Toby Schneider. And first I want to thank Ms. Wallace for shepherding me through this process. As a newbie, it's been very difficult, and even though I disagree with the staff's findings, she's been very helpful in getting me through this and guiding me through this. So I thank you, Ms. Wallace. I would like to enlarge the house. The house is way too small to live in full time. Joan and I, spend weekends there. We come down often, and it's getting to the point where I'm thinking about retiring. And it's only 900 square feet, and the kitchen is tiny. The whole house is tiny. When you have guests or kids or children over, it's quite cramped. So, I don't want to tear this down and build some kind of, something that stands out in the neighborhood. I'd like to enlarge it, and I'd like to enlarge it so the addition looks like seamless with the existing house. I was listening to this proposal on phase 2 historical houses, and where if they're not really historic, but you want to keep the character of the charming old Carmel houses. I think the historians will show that this is not really a good example of the craftsman style, and it shouldn't be listed. But on this phase 2 idea, I think that's exactly what I want to do. Is I want to put an addition on to make it look like you can't tell where the new place starts and the old place ends. My understanding, if it's historic, any addition, even if it's allowed, has to be distinguished from the original. And I think that would just detract from the way the house looks. So I think if it's determined historic, I'm just not going to be able to enlarge it. So I hope that you listen to the architects and not the architects, but the consultants. Now, there are a lot has been made about this is a craftsman house, and then it doesn't have to be the first, last, or best example of a craftsman home. And I understand that, but it's not even a good example. There are very few, as you'll hear from the consultants, there are very few characteristics of a real craftsman home that exist in this house. The idea that this a U-shaped courtyard is a defining characteristic. I mean, yes, there are projections of the front 2 bedrooms towards the street from the main entrance, but basically that's a walk. There's no interior courtyard or patio or anything like that. The chimney is not built out of Carmel stone or something else that's considered historic. The windows have been changed out. I can tell that the only 3 original windows are the 3 casement windows. The others have been changed out. They're built with torque screws. The windows in the garage have been totally different in the garage. There are a bunch of windows that have been added that were not there originally. So the garage especially would be a poor example. And I believe that the garage was torn down in 2009 when the permit was granted for a new concrete footing. I mean, it's just implausible to believe that you would take a garage out, pour a slab, and then put the same garage back on. That would be much more expensive than just tearing it down and building a new one. And the garage inside is new. So I think the garage is not original. The people I bought the house from, used to own the French apartment store in Carmel. And they decorated it really nicely. It made it charming. They put the window boxes on, they put the shutters on. We've got flowers everywhere. And I've kept a lot of that. And that's really what makes it charming. The rest of this, it's just not a real charming craftsman home. Or it's charming, but it doesn't have the features of a craftsman home enough to list it on the inventory. And so I would just ask you to make this determination of ineligibility. There have been 4 historians that have evaluated this home. Catherine Gualtieri, Meg Clovis, Anthony Kirk, and Kent Seavey. And 3 of the 4 historians have concluded that this house is not historic and not eligible for listing on the historic inventory. And I do have to agree. I did read Ms. Clovis's report. I think it's well written, but I think she just misses the whole point that it may have a few features that she can kind of force into her craftsman style, but it's not really a good example of the craftsman style. And as far as the windows go, the context statement for Carmel says, I don't know if staff can bring that up, but it shows the windows could be sliding, casement, double hung. That's basically what other windows are there. I mean, there's no windows that that don't fit in that statement. So I think that's kind of the fact that they're sliding and just shouldn't really matter as far as making it historic.
Mr. Schneider, I hate to interrupt you, but you're bumping up against your allotted time. Is there anything else you'd like?
Fair enough. I
with?
I would just ask that you consider it not historic and allow me to build it. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thanks very much. Mr. Kirk? Mr. Kirk, go ahead, please.
Unmute.
Unmute.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I've prepared a short presentation that I would like to read. It appears to me that the pertinent question at hand is whether or not the house at the southwest corner of Mission Street and 12th Avenue in Carmel is, as May Clovis says in her evaluation of the property, quote, a good example of the craftsman style. I looked up the word good in the dictionary. I have an unabridged dictionary. I didn't use the dictionary that comes with my computer. And it is the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, which was published in 2009. It's the 4th edition. It lists more than 20 meanings for the word good. Looking through them, it's evident that the word signifies, quote, having the qualities that are desirable or distinguishing in a particular thing. I think it's important that it says distinguishing. And then it also continues, whatever is good should be in excellent condition, superior to the average. So more good just doesn't mean average. It means it's got to be superior to average, and this has to be of high quality. In my opinion, that makes it evident that the house is not a good example of the craftsman style of architecture, as May Clovis says. The date the house on 12th Avenue was constructed is also open to question. Ms. Clovis gives 1925 as the date it was built. However, a review of the record of building permits, City of Carmel-by-the-Sea, which was compiled by the city clerk, shows that a building permit was not issued in 1925 or 1926. Possibly the city clerk was in error, as Catherine Wallace makes a case for, but the building permit record does not show a permit issued in August of 1925. This date is 3 months before Henry and Martha Gard, the original owners, even purchased the lot. And I think that Ms. Wallace, at times in her rejoinder to what I wrote, has not been particularly careful about what she says. And she seems to be supportive of May Clovis and doesn't really seem to take into account what I have said, or to a certain extent what Cancivi has said. The house was originally evaluated in 2008 by Catherine Gualtieri, and she was the former California State Historic Preservation Officer. It was also at the same time evaluated by Susan Lehman, who is a highly experienced Santa Cruz architectural historian. The two women found the property to be ineligible for listing in the California Register of Historical Resources. They referred to the house as a vernacular cottage. And I would say that's a good description of it. Today, anyone strolling along 12th Avenue in Carmel would have no idea that the house is an example of craftsman architecture. There's not a single element of the house that is typical of the style, apart from the character of the roof and its one-story height. And those features are typical of countless styles, typically vernacular buildings. Ms. Wallace references a book written by Virginia Savage McAllister, A Field Guide to American Houses, which was published in New York in 2013. But she neglects to mention the identifying features the author states are associated with craftsman houses. And this is a very important element. They are as follows. 1, a low-pitched roof with wide unenclosed eave overhang. It definitely has that. Decorative beams or braces added under the gables. It does not have that. A partial or full-width porch with roof supported by tapered square columns. There is no porch on the house. Porch columns or piers frequently extend to the ground level, and obviously they don't because they're not there. Houses are usually 1 or 1.5 stories in height. This is 1 story in height, and there's no problem with that. Much the same features are mentioned in Cyril Harris's Magisterial Dictionary of Architecture and Construction, which was published in New York in 2006. It also states that the fenestration of a craftsman house consists of double-hung windows or casement windows. It makes no mention of fixed windows or sliding windows. Whereas the house on 12th Avenue consists chiefly of sliding and fixed sash windows. There are a couple of casement windows, but no double hung windows, as one would typically find. In the letter that I wrote to Ms. Wallace, I included photographs of craftsman-style houses in Carmel that have porches and have the sort of windows that are described by Cyril Harris. As far as the garage is concerned, it was constructed at the same time that the house was, or within a month or two of it, and it was changed into a exterior bedroom at a much later date, presumably when the application was made for a foundation for it. And in my opinion, the garage alone has lost its historic integrity. There were 3 windows that were added to the north and east sides, and those are the sides that face the street. And in my opinion, this was a major loss of its historic integrity. The 3 windows on the north and east sides, and those are the sides that face the sidewalk and the streets.
Mr. Kirk, I again hate to interrupt you, but you are bumping up against your time. Can you?
I'm almost done. Almost done.
Please go ahead.
Okay, the installation of the windows resulted, to my mind, in the loss of materials and workmanship and ultimately the feeling of the former garage. In my opinion, it's lost its historic integrity. As I stated in my original opinion of May Clovis's work, the house is not a good example of craftsman architecture and is not eligible for listing in the California Register of Historical Resources. It should not be placed in the Carmel Inventory of Historic Resources, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Oh.
Pass that around. And this, just those 2 front covers. Kent Seeley, Pacific Grove Historic Preservation Consultant. I support Dr. Kurt's findings. I support Catherine Gualtieri's findings. She was SHPO for 20 years. She lived in Carmel for what, 20 years, was the chairman of your commission. Ms. Lehman was one of the senior preservation people and I don't know if she's gone, in Santa Cruz County, and I concur with the findings that she and that Lehman made back in 2008. Guess what else happened in 2008? Your historic context statement got passed. So you're talking about people who are concurrent, looking at that building specifically at that point in time and space. So the language in the context statement somehow doesn't align with the consultant's language. 2 things occur here. One, the requirement under CEQA for there are twin factors of historic significance and integrity to be considered for listing, and we're talking about your Carmel Historic Resource Inventory, and that's integrity and significance. And she has laid out integrity in an interesting way for me, because what I see is exactly what the 2 preservation consultants saw in 2008, a vernacular building. I note to you that in 1978, Richard Janik had a study of the cultural resources in Carmel, extensive. This building isn't on it. In 1997, he did sales. Who thinks every building should be saved? Had an extensive resource inventory of Carmel-by-the-Bay, and that building isn't on it. And a guy by the name of Kent Seeley came in 2001 working with another Janik who'd worked earlier from 2001 to 2003, and we walked every street in this town. And guess what? That building isn't on it. Now, there are at least 5 preservation consultants certified by the state who agree that this is not an historic building. And there are 3 public cultural resources surveys that do not list it as an historic building, and I would suggest that it is not. But I will tell you that there are 30 pardon me, 30 of the building types listed in the essay, in these 3 things, in these 3 documents. And so I will be hopefully clear, concise, and be gone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, David O'Neill again. I just kind of wanted to speak as an investor. So I recently bought a craftsman style house that I'm going to redo, try to make it how it was and as though it was new. I look at this property and I say it would be very sad to lose it in general, but it needs a lot of work. It really should be refurbished. If I was looking at it and I was wanting to make it a historic property, I'd want to refurbish it, put it back to the best way it could possibly be, and then make it historic. So I wouldn't want to lose it, but I don't think that it should be historic in this state. So, my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Cindy Lloyd again out here in the virtual world.
Hi, Cindy.
I'm not an architect. I'm a retired nurse. I'm an avid gardener, but a lifelong resident of Carmel-by-the-Sea with some absences elsewhere. But I've always been interested in architecture and design. And having grown up in Carmel, I've always loved this little house. But I agree, this house is not historic. It does not have all the properties that have been deemed determinate for historic classification. And I found this education in this discussion wonderful. So I would encourage the owner of the property to be allowed to do what he wants to do, which is to create a nice building there that encompasses the same design. And believe me, if Enid Sales didn't think this was historic, it wasn't historic. I certainly, I worked with Enid, I knew her for a long time, and she was a force to be, force for anything historic. I also took a class at MPC with my mother from Richard Janik and from Kent Seavey on the architecture of the Monterey Peninsula, and I learned a lot from them. So anyway, it's just one voice out here in the, I'm not gonna say the wilderness, because I live up in Carmel Woods. I don't live in downtown Carmel anymore. And I would hope that it would not be determined historic. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? I see a hand, but I can't tell who's raising it.
Tom Hood, he was up in the corner a while back.
Can you go to the full gallery view, please?
Maybe he's talking on mute.
It's Sebastian. Yeah. It's the guy downstairs.
There he is.
Was there anyone else that had a comment? I'm not seeing any other comments now. Okay, we'll close the public portion and bring it back to the board. Board member comments?
I always have comments. I think whether this is deemed historic or not historic, I just want to clarify that even if it were deemed historic, that doesn't mean that you couldn't add on significantly as long as you stuck within the Secretary of the Interior standards. So also, you could always add an ADU. Certainly it's a large enough property, and we know that the state has mandated that, whether we like it or not. So it's not like you can't add on if it were deemed historic, and also that it would have to be distinguished from the original house. Those can be very subtle distinguishing characteristics. It's not like it has to look totally different than the original historic home. So I just wanted to clarify that.
I'm really torn. I was all ready to go with a wonderful staff report and definitely say, yes, this is historic. But I've heard some very convincing testimony. But I do agree with Commissioner Hall that there is no reason why this house cannot be added on to. I mean, all of the things that you said, it does not have to be, you know, a completely different style. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I thought that when I feel the same way you do, that I was convinced it was historic. There's been a lot of discussion today that maybe it doesn't qualify. I thought that all the arguments for it not being historic, when I read through them, didn't really hold water for me, that the rebuttals by Catherine were very credible. I have pause now with a lot of input from the public.
I think that the house has had a lot of alterations, and I think we can name like 20. And I also think there's better examples of craftsman cottages in Carmel, so I would vote for it to not be historic.
Catherine, can you bring up the slide with the recommendations at the end of your presentation, please? So I think if we deem it to not be historic, we have to basically identify why we don't do that. And I think Mr. Seavey was pretty clear in his comments, as were many of the other people, that, you know, there were linkages, but maybe not as defining. The characteristics weren't as defining as they could be, and certainly not as defining as they are in a bunch of other examples in the area. So, do we want to discuss this any further, or would anyone like to make a nomination, or a motion, sorry, nomination?
I guess I'm still on the side. I guess I would make a motion that we deem it historic, just because I think there's enough still left of the original house, and that Catherine has pointed out that it doesn't have to be a good example or a better example, that it can just be an example.
I'll second that.
Okay. Can we have so we're voting at this point to deem it a historic property in line with the staff
I just want to
recommendations.
interject very quickly. It does need to be a good example, not an exceptional example, but it does need to be a good example.
Oh, it does.
I mean, if I could just comment, I think it is important to look at that as in the historic context, and certainly Catherine did a good job of walking us through it. But I don't think a single one of us, when we walked up to that house, thought that was we would categorize that as a craftsman house. And walking around it, it brought me further away from the thoughts. The thing that I thought honestly was the most significant was the exterior and the chimney. But other than that, you know, it didn't have a lot of resounding echoes of craftsman houses in it.
Is it necessary to be deemed a good craftsman style? Couldn't it be vernacular cottage style, or I don't know what else to call it, but does it have to fit into some category of house specific to being historic or not?
I think that question is for you, Catherine. I mean, we're evaluating against a specific style, though, so sorry, I want to let you answer.
I'm interested to hear what Marnie has to say as well, but I believe the board could request a second opinion, and the issue of was the style accurately identified or not could be relooked at. A potential second opinion could say it's significant as a vernacular cottage. Marnie, can you confirm that procedure?
The board can certainly direct staff to go back and reevaluate certain aspects of this review. So that would be an option before you. So you can either adopt staff's recommendation, you can make findings that it does not retain the integrity or is not a good example of the craftsman style, and have us issue the determination of ineligibility. So I think those are your two primary options.
So I think we do have a motion though on, do we need to cancel that motion? Or?
We do have a motion and a second.
Yeah, with.
Yeah, I was wondering where the vote was, but yeah.
Sorry. Or do we want to vote on that?
Do we want to
I
retract
think we should
that or
vote
what?
on that,
I
don't
mean,
we? Don't we have to vote on that if it's a
we don't-
motion and a second?
We don't have to, I don't know.
I think we've walked back from it before in some procedural method, but I mean, if you want that to move forward, we can certainly do that.
Well, let's see where we stand.
Okay.
Board Member Goodhue?
Yes?
Board Member Hall?
Yes?
Board Member Pomeroy?
No.
Chair Croman?
No.
Okay, the motion fails.
Okay. Okay, do we need to do anything else? It's not, so at that point, it would not be put on the historic register.
It would not. However, in order for us to issue a determination of ineligibility, we do need findings from the board.
Okay. Kathy,
Okay.
do you have
Findings.
that you want to talk about?
My findings are that it's been significantly altered in a dozen ways, having to do with window boxes and shutters and windows and the garage and the decking and stairs exterior, all that were apparently not original.
Okay. The yeses.
Do you want to make a substitute or make a motion with those findings?
Based on those findings, we find that it is ineligible for the historic register.
Okay, is there a second to that? I would second that, but then I think we can go for a vote and we'll probably have the same result. We saw that. Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Goodhue?
No.
Board Member Hall?
No.
Board Member Pomeroy?
Yes.
Chair Croman?
Yes.
Okay, so we're at an impasse.
I would say.
The board could consider continuing the item until we have a fifth member. That could potentially break a tie. We do expect that interviews will be forthcoming, and we may have a board member as early as February.
Okay. Is everybody amenable to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do that then.
Okay.
Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, thanks for your patience, Mr. Schneider.
Do you have any questions, Mr. Snyder?
Could you explain to me what just happened? Is it my understanding that it's ineligible, but you haven't figured out why? Or is the ineligibility issue still up in the air?
I think the board of four has come to an impasse. Two of us feel that it should not be eligible, and two of us feel that it should be eligible. So the suggestion has been made, and we've accepted that when the fifth member of the board, which this board normally has 5 members on, is added to the board, hopefully as early as next board meeting, we can revisit this topic and vote with a 5-person panel so that we won't reach the impasse that we've reached.
Do we need to present anything further for the fifth member, or?
I think we would redo the staff
Yes.
presentation, right?
Yes, we would have another hearing at the next available meeting.
There's a-
And would you want to hear from the other historians that just talked about it? For the fifth member?
I think it's compelling. I mean, if they're available, I think their testimony is pretty compelling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your consideration. I really do.
Thanks. Mr. Kirk, did you quickly want to say something? I think you're on mute still.
It's been a while since I've looked at the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, and that's what you're talking about when you speak to the issue of Dr. Tobin being able to make an addition to the house. However, the only place that it could be made would be on a secondary elevation, which would be the back of the house. And in my understanding, there's no room back there to do anything at all. So I don't know how he could make an addition to the house.
Okay, thanks.
So as a matter of procedure, we do need to have a motion to continue this item to the next available meeting when a fifth board member is present.
Okay. Do we have a motion for that? We're all in agreement.
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
I'll second.
Can we have a vote, please?
Board Member Goodhue?
Yes?
Board Member Hall?
Yes.
Board Member Pomeroy?
Yes.
Chair Croman?
Yes. Okay. So that concludes public hearings. Can we have the director's report, please?
Sure. So I have just a couple items, as we just discussed. Our Historic Resources Board has a vacancy. The application, the deadline to submit an application is January 25th, which is this Thursday, I believe. And so once that period closes, the city clerk will go ahead and schedule interviews. She is trying really hard to get those interviews scheduled with the mayor and vice mayor so we can have that fifth board member in February, sorry. And then the second item, as I mentioned earlier, the city council is going to be having their annual strategic planning meeting at the end of the month. It'll be on January 31st over at the Sunset Center. That is open to the public. And lastly, our Design Traditions project, we're making great progress. We almost have a full draft of the residential design guidelines ready for public review. The steering committee will meet again this Thursday at 8:30 a.m. And that project is just moving forward beautifully.
What time for the January 31st meeting?
I believe it's at 10 to 4. 10 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Oh, boy. Okay.
And that's all I have.
Okay, do we have any other future agenda items? And I would say that our future agenda items that we raised last time, I appreciate the staff being so quick to jump on those for us and give us some food for thought. So we know that that's a good vehicle for bringing up new business. So are there any future agenda items?
Just, I guess, a rediscussion. I don't know what the timing is in terms of the level 2. If we had level 2 in place, we could have maybe offered that to Mr. Schneider. But do we need to put that on the agenda again for next time to look at how it's moving along, whether it's when it's going to be presented to the council, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so the next step will be staff taking your recommendation to the city council. We do need them to authorize us to work on the project. And if I heard you correctly, you did want us to go ahead and pursue a policy first to try to roll it out and see kind of how it goes. So we will take that to the city council. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get on their February agenda because it's kind of late in the month for that, but certainly we could plan for March.
Okay.
And then you'll just give us a report as part of the director's report on how that went.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you.
I would just like to thank staff for this wonderful packet. I don't know how late you guys worked on that, but it took me a whole day and a half to read through the darn thing. It was just incredible. Thank you.
Tremendous effort.
Good job. All right, any other business? Okay, with that, I think then we can adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. That was good.
Very good meeting. Not easy, but very
No,
good.
Thanks, Marty, that was great. Appreciate it. You and the team. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for
Thank you,
coming
David.
here. Appreciate your comments.
Have a good night.
David. Hey, Esther, I wanted to introduce myself. I don't know if I had a chance to meet them.